Hello and welcome to another video in my MONTAGE M Demystified series. In this video I'm going to take you on a tour of the fantastically powerful control assignment system in MONTAGE M. I'll demonstrate how to assign various parameters to the assignable controls, including aftertouch, so that you can shape the sounds in your performances without having to dive into the editor. And then we'll look at how to add a selection of those assignments to the super knob. After that, we'll dive into how to inspect control assignments so that you can understand how existing mappings may be influencing the performance. And then we'll use that knowledge to restore super knob behaviors to parts that we've merged into the current performance. Let's get into it. So when we discuss control assignments, what are we actually talking about? There are a number of physical inputs and controls on MONTAGE M, including the assignable knobs and switches, the mod wheel and ribbon controller, channel and polyphonic aftertouch, and of course the super knob. Almost every parameter used to edit sounds can be attached to one or more of these controllers, and thankfully Montage family synthesizers make it very easy to set that up. Let's start with a really basic example to get us into the swing of things. I want a sound that comes with no control assignments at all, so from an init ANX performance, I'm going to create a basic pad sound using the quick edit controls. We'll begin with a saw wave and leave that pretty much as is. Then we'll add a second oscillator using a square wave and drop that by an octave. Slightly detune it by about 18 cents or so and raise the output level to 350 so we can hear it, before setting a pulse width of maybe 25%. Now to make this a pad, we need a slow attack and plenty of release. So let's go to the amplitude section and set an attack of round about 165, a decay of 150 or so, sustain to maybe 330 or so, and a release of 200. Let's turn our attention to the filter. And as I said, this will be a very simple sound, so we're just going to use one filter. And we'll set the cutoff to round about 500. Now we can go to the filter envelope and set the depth to about 4700. Before we set roughly the same ADSR as the amp, so approximately 160 on the attack, decay of 150, sustain to 330-ish, and a nice long release. Okay, the sound is working nicely. So let's make our first control assignment. I'm going to click onto Navigation to give me an overview of my sound in the main display, and I'll select the filter. I'll select the cutoff control for filter 1, and you'll notice that the control assign button lights dimly, which tells us that this parameter can be assigned to a control. If you don't see the control assign button light up like this, you probably have your half glow set to off, which is not very useful when editing sounds. To turn it on, go to Utility, Settings, System, and you'll find the half glow setting there. I have mine set to 1/4 as it makes the dim light much more discernible against the fully lit buttons than the half setting. Back to Navigation and Filter, I've selected the cutoff for filter 1 and control assign lights up. One click on the control assign button and you'll see that it turns to full brightness, meaning that control assignment is active, and it opens the destination parameter dialog. From here you can choose to modulate your parameter using a motion sequencer lane or an envelope follower, but we haven't touched on those yet, so I'll leave them alone for now. The more common way to use this dialog is to simply move the control to which you want to assign the parameter. So let's wiggle the super knob, and instantly the super knob now controls the cutoff. But as you can hear, when we reach the upper limit of the super knob's movement, the sound disappears. Why is that? Well, as you may remember, this sound is only going to use one filter, but there are two filters on any ANX part, The first one is a low pass filter and the second one is a high pass filter. So when I move the super knob, it's controlling both of those filters. So while I open the low pass filter, it's also closing the high pass filter, resulting in no sound at all when we get to the upper limit. This is the first lesson of using control assign. It's not enough to simply make your assignment and accept the defaults. You always need to ensure that the control assignment is only controlling those parameters you actually want to. So in this case, let's go back here and assign that again, and presumably it's done it again. So let's just delete that one and come back to the one we already set. And you can see here that we have a filter switch. So all we have to do is uncheck the control for filter 2 so that the super knob only controls filter 1. And now we can hear that that is doing exactly what we want. So now let's make another assignment. I'll go back to navigation and select the filter again, but this time I'm going to select the resonance for filter 1 and click Control Assign. I want to assign this to the ribbon controller, so I just have to touch the ribbon and the assignment's made. Once again though, I need to make sure that the assignment is only controlling filter 1, so I'll turn off the switch that makes it affect filter 2. There is another thing to adjust because right now the control allows the resonance to go from nothing to full on, and I never want that. So I'm going to adjust the ratio from 64, which means full on, and take the ratio down to more like +20, so that when I reach the full limit of my control, it doesn't put the resonance to full. When using the ribbon as a control, it's important to set its mode because right now it's not doing what I want it to. By default, the ribbon will snap back to the middle as soon as we release it, which means that it will sit there with the resonance at its medium level all the time. So we need to change that such that the ribbon stays where we leave it. To do that, we need to access the ribbon settings by holding down Shift and pressing the hold button above the ribbon. From here, we can change the ribbon mode from reset to hold. And now we can control the resonance using the ribbon, and it will stay at the setting in which we leave it. For my next assignment, I'm going to bring in a third oscillator. So let's select part 1 and head over to Quick Edit and then click on Oscillator 3. I want to bring in a tone 2 octaves above the main oscillator. So let's make sure we've got a saw wave set and then set the octave to 2 feet. I'll leave everything else alone, but I'm going to set the oscillator level to 0 so that it makes no sound until I bring it in with my control assignment. To make the control assignment, I need the oscillator level on the main display. So I'll click the page jump control and the contents of the sub-display appear on the main screen. Now I'll select Out Level and you'll see that the control assign button lights up, ready for me to make the assignment. Let's click that and then move the mod wheel so that it controls the level of oscillator 3, remembering to turn off control for oscillators 1 and 2. As nice as that is, what I really want to do is use that third oscillator to add another level of expression to my sound. And to do that, I want to use aftertouch. I'll make this initial assignment using channel aftertouch so that M6 and M7 owners can follow along, and I'll dig into polyphonic aftertouch later in the video as that's a rather more complex prospect at the moment. Below the control assign section of the edit menu is the aftertouch section. Let's open that up and set the keyboard aftertouch mode to channel. Now we can go back to navigation, select oscillator 3, pick up Out Level, and the control assign button lights up as before. With the control assign system armed, we can just press any key right down into aftertouch, and like magic, the assignment's made. Let's turn off the oscillators that we don't want to affect, and now we can either use the mod wheel to bring in the level of the third oscillator, or we can use aftertouch. Up to this point, we've only been assigning a single parameter destination to each control, but there's nothing stopping us adding several destinations to any one control. So let's make it so that when I press a key into aftertouch, it brings in an LFO on the pitch of oscillator 1, so we get a bit of vibrato. First of all, I'm going to play with that pitch LFO, just to see how much I'm going to want before it starts to sound ridiculous. So I think that's going to work. I've got a value of about 350 from a potential maximum of 4800. So let's call that somewhere between 10 and 20% or whatever. I'll reset that to 0. If you struggle to get it exactly where you want it, hold down Shift as you move the knob to get fine control. Now we'll head back to the aftertouch control assignment screen and add a new destination. I'm going to change that destination to ANX parameters OSC pitch LFO, and then I'll turn off control for oscillators 2 and 3. And now I'm going to adjust the ratio so that the parameter never goes to its full value. Let's try about 20. So that's the basics of making control assignments, but to really make the most of the system, we need to dig a little deeper to see how these assignments are being made. When you understand the system, you'll be able to inspect the control assignments in presets or imported performances so that you can make the best use of them or modify them to your own requirements. Let's talk about part level controls first. Each part in a montage performance is essentially a self-contained synthesizer. So each part has its own set of controls, including the 8 assignable knobs, which can work either in quick edit mode or assign mode. When a specific part is selected, generally speaking, the various hardware controls will affect just that part. Controls at the part level can operate any of the parameters for that part, such as the output level for the individual elements, operators or oscillators, or the various properties of the filters, pitch, envelopes, effects, and so on. If a control exposes multiple destinations, such as the individual elements, operators or oscillators within the part, or the dual filters in an ANX part, those controls can usually be configured to target specific destinations, as we did with the control we assigned to just the first filter of our pad earlier, and the control we instructed to affect the oscillator level of just the third oscillator. Of course, Montage can have multiple parts in a performance, and more often than not, you'll have common selected rather than a specific part. You can think of common as either referring to the performance itself as the container for all the individual parts, or as the set of controls and parameters that all the parts have in common. When assignments are made at the part level to the mod wheel, the ribbon, aftertouch, or the assignable switches, those controls will still operate with common selected, as their assigned destinations are active both when the specific part and when common is selected. Let's just test that with our mod wheel assignment. So right now we have common selected, and I can still hear that control working. I'll switch back to part 1 and it works, and even if I switch to a part that doesn't actually exist yet, then it's all working fine. The super knob and the 8 assignable knobs work differently, and we'll come on to that later. So let's pretend that the performance we've just put together is not our own and inspect its control assignments. There are 2 ways to inspect control assignments. The first is new to Montage M, and it can be a very handy shortcut. Begin by selecting the part in which the control assignments you want to inspect were made, then hold down Shift and click Control Assign. And you'll find yourself looking at the control view screen, which looks very similar to the destination parameter dialog, except that instead of making control assignments from here, we can view assignments. So now we can just move any assignable control, like the ribbon controller or the assignable knob, and we'll jump straight to the interface to view the assignments for that control. So let's do that again. We'll do Shift, Control Assign, touch the ribbon controller, and we can see the resonance assignment that I made. Let's jump back to Performance Home for a second and select the performance itself, or the common part, rather than any specific part. Now let's do Shift, Control Assign again and touch the ribbon controller. This time I don't see any control assignment. Why is that? Well, remember that I told you that control assignments can either be made at the part level or at the performance or common level. By entering the control assign inspector with the performance or the common part selected, we'll be looking at the common assignments rather than those made for any specific part. And right now we haven't made any of those for the ribbon, so the interface is empty. But notice that the part button for part 1 is flashing, and that tells us that there are assignments for part 1, and if we click it, we can view them. Likewise, if we go to common and create a random control assignment, then when we switch to part 1, we will see, let's just make that random assignment. When we switch to part 1, we'll see common flashing to inform us that there are assignments there. Let's get rid of that one. Now, I said that there are two ways to inspect assignments, and we're kind of already using the second because we're in the control assign interface. And from here, we can actually switch to view any or all of the assignments for the performance. My preferred way to work here is to use the auto select toggle at the top of the screen, which unfortunately uses a terrible selection of colors to indicate its state, making it far more difficult to tell whether it's active or not, especially compared to the classic MONTAGE and MODX. But with auto select enabled, I can just move any assignable control and the interface will jump to show any assignments that have been made for that control. So if I move the mod wheel now, we can see the assignments. Once again, you'll see the part buttons flashing to indicate parts that have assignments, and you can click that part button to see the part assignments. There's also a menu you can open to manually pick a control, and in here is a particularly useful option, All. By selecting All, we can see all of the assignments for the current part, all on the same screen. Up to 4 assignments can be shown on a single page, and there's a page control to allow you to jump in case there's more than 4. Now that we've seen how to navigate the control assignment system, I can come back to the subject of polyphonic aftertouch. On the classic Montage, assigning a control to aftertouch was very easy and used the same control assign system as all the other controls. But for MONTAGE M in Poly Aftertouch mode, there's an entirely separate aftertouch control assign section, which appears to be largely pointless at the moment, but perhaps Yamaha plans to build out this section in the future to make full use of the GEX Poly Aftertouch keybed in the M8x. We shall see. We already made a couple of assignments to channel aftertouch, but now I want to make some assignments for polyphonic aftertouch. I don't actually need to get rid of the channel aftertouch assignments because when I switch the keyboard over to polyphonic aftertouch mode, the channel aftertouch assignments will simply be ignored unless the performance is being played by an external keyboard that transmits channel aftertouch over MIDI. So let's get the keyboard set up for polyphonic aftertouch. To do this, we have to make sure that we have a part selected using the part buttons, and then in the edit interface, make sure that common is selected rather than any particular element or operator. You can also do this using Shift and pressing common. Next, go to Mod Control and Aftertouch and change the keyboard AT mode to Poly. There's actually a bit of a gotcha here because although keyboard AT mode is set when editing a single part, it's actually a performance level setting, so you can't have some parts using channel aftertouch and others using poly aftertouch in the same performance. Now, you might be expecting me to go to navigation and select the oscillator, pick up the output level, press Control Assign, and press a key down into aftertouch to make the assignment. But for reasons I can't explain, that doesn't actually work at all in Poly Aftertouch mode with the current MONTAGE M firmware. I have reported the issue on IdeaScale and maybe it'll get changed in a future firmware update, but for the time being with firmware 2.10 we're going to have to make the assignment the hard way. I'll exit out of the destination parameter dialog, which takes me back to the page for editing oscillator 3. I want to edit the common section of this part, so I could either select common from the drop-down menu at the top, or I can get there by holding down Shift and pressing the common part button. Now, I want to go to Mod Control, Aftertouch, and press the big plus gadget there to add an assignment. The default assignment is for pitch, but I don't want that, so click on pitch to access the menu with the other destinations. Slightly confusingly, while the parameter was called out level while we were editing the sound, in this menu it's called OSC output, oscillator output, and can be found under the ANX parameter menu. There we go. With the correct destination selected, I can turn off control for oscillators 1 and 2 and test my assignment. I actually want the parameter to come in gradually as I press the keys and then accelerate as I press harder. So I'm going to change the graph to more of a curve by editing parameter 1 upwards, so it makes more of a sort of upward slope. And now I can bring in this high-pitched oscillator for individual keys in a very Vangelis-y way. Let's add that pitch LFO assignment 2 while we're here. So hit the plus gadget on the next assignment slot, select OSC pitch LFO from the parameters menu, turn off control for oscillators 2 and 3, set the ratio to 20 as we did before, and we should be good to go. I said earlier that I'd come back to the subject of the super knob and the 8 assignable knobs because they work differently from the other controls. When a part is selected and the assignable knobs are in assign mode, the assignments will control just that part as you'd expect. But if you select common, the assignable knobs switch to common mode. In common mode, the assignable knobs can control any of the parameters at the performance level, such as the various common reverb and variation effects and other global settings like performance volume, tempo, portamento time and things like that. But they cannot directly target parameters that exist within the individual parts, like the filter cutoff or specific oscillator levels. There is no intrinsic link between the common knobs and the part level knobs, so moving any of the knobs in common mode will have absolutely no effect upon the knobs in the individual parts. So you might be surprised to learn that there is already a relationship set up between the common knobs and the part level knobs for part 1 in this performance. Looking at the list of control assignments for part 1, you can see the oscillator output being controlled by the mod wheel and the resonance being controlled by the ribbon, but the cutoff control, which we assign to the super knob, doesn't say that its source is the super knob. It says assign knob 1. So why is that? When we assigned cutoff to the super knob, we instructed MONTAGE M to create a more complex setup than the resonance and oscillator output controls, which were assigned directly to their respective hardware controllers. Let's follow the assignments. The cutoff assignment says its source controller is assign knob 1, which refers to the first assignable knob for this part. And if we move that knob, we can see that it does indeed control the filter cutoff. Let's quickly give that assignment a label so that we can distinguish it in the sub-display. I'll use destination to name to give me a starting point, and then I'll refine that to remind me that the control only operates the first filter. The super knob works by controlling any of the common knobs that have super knob link enabled. So right now, the super knob is controlling the filter cutoff for part 1, so one of the common knobs must be involved. If I switch back to part 1 and set the display filter to all, I can see the common button flashing away to let us know that there are assignments at the common level. So let's click the common part button to show all the assignments made at the common or performance level. We've got this assignment which I made just when I was showing you what could be assigned at the common level, but we've also got something assigned to part 1 assign 1. Or in plain English, assign knob 1 at the common level controls the first assignable knob belonging to part 1. So when we move the super knob, it controls common knob 1 because it's connected via super knob link. And when common knob 1 moves, it in turn moves assign knob 1 for part 1, which in turn controls the filter. Did that sound confusing? I wouldn't be surprised if it did. So let's save the current performance and go and inspect a few other performances to see how they're set up. I'm going to head to the category browser and replace the current performance with the CFX2 Dark performance instead of the one that we were just building. CFX2 Dark is a single part performance, so I'm going to select part 1, and making sure that the assignable knobs are in assign mode, we can see any assignments made to this part. Looking at the sub-display, I can see that there are named assignments for knobs 1 and 2, and if I hit Shift and Control Assign and move one of those, we can inspect exactly what it does. So knob 1 controls the amount of reverb send, and knob 2 controls the cutoff. I'm going to adjust the names of those assignments to make the next step clearer, so I will just add P1 to the end of both of those names, and we can see the results in the sub-display and know that they are assignments for part 1. Next, I'm going to press the Common Part button so that we have the performance itself selected rather than any specific part, and let's look at the sub-display again. At first glance, you might think that suddenly the edits to the assignment names I just made have been reverted, but if I quickly switch back to part 1, my edited assignment names are still there. So once again, what we're looking at here is assignments to the knobs at the part level and at the performance or common level. When we have the common part, that being the performance itself selected, the 8 assignable knobs are shared between all of the individual parts of the performance, and they have to be instructed how to talk to those individual parts. Let's just take a quick listen to how the sound is modulated when we move the super knob with the foot controller, because we're going to come back to this later. CFX2 Dark is a MONTAGE M 2.0 performance, so it's got a very tidy setup with labelled assignments. But let's take a look at a far messier performance and see if we can determine what's going on. Back in the category browser, I'm going to load up FM Lately Bass. This time, knobs 1 and 2 at the common level are labelled assigned, which is not very helpful. And what's more, all the knobs have super knob link, so when I adjust the super knob, they all move. Looking at the assignment labels for part 1 in the sub-display, the story isn't much clearer. But if we move the super knob, only the first 2 knobs move, so we can be fairly certain that common knob 1 points to knob 1 from part 1, and common knob 2 is assigned to knob 2 from part 1. Again, let's play around with the assignable knobs to hear their effects. You might be able to guess from the way the sound is modified when I move the knobs as to what the assignments actually do, but just to remove any ambiguity, let's inspect them. I'll go back to the common part. I'm using Shift Control Assign and then move knob 1, and sure enough we can see that the destination of assign knob 1 is part 1 assign 1, and if we inspect the second knob by making sure that auto select is enabled and moving knob 2, it's confirmed that the destination for assign knob 2 is part 1 assign 2. So that confirms what we already knew about the knobs at the common level, but I can see that the part 1 button is flashing, so let's click that to see the assignments for this knob in part 1. Now we can see what the assignment is really doing. It's affecting the operator level for operator 6, giving the sound a little bit of bite in some magical FM way that I don't pretend to fully understand. Moving knob 1 reveals that it controls the amplifier decay for operator 3. There is a great way to get an overview of all the parameters currently controlled by the super knob. Let's switch back to common and move the super knob. And here we can see that the super knob has 2 assigned destinations, part 1 assign 1 via common assign knob 1, and part 1 assign 2 via, let's just select it, assign knob 2. We can also get a summary of what those destinations are controlling, but viewing them at the common level doesn't reveal all the detail. So let's select part 1 again, and now we get a more in-depth view of how the destinations are being controlled, including which operators are being affected by the control input. Okay, so with our newfound knowledge of how the assignable knobs at the common level can affect the part level assignable knobs, let's bring back the performance we built at the start of the video. I want to make a couple of new control assignments so that I can control the FM level and sync pitch of oscillator 2. So I'm going to select the part, go to navigation and select oscillator 2. From here, I'll select FM level, and as expected, the control assign button lights. Let's click that and assign it to the first unused assignable knob for part 1, which is knob 2. I'll turn off control for oscillator 1 so that the knob only affects oscillator 2, set the destination to the name to give it a label for easy reference, and that's done. Now I want to do the same for sync pitch, so back to navigation, click on oscillator 2, click on sync pitch, control assign, and this time we'll assign it to knob 3. Once again, turn off control for all but the second oscillator, give it a meaningful name, and we're all set. So that's the part level assignments done. But if I go back to Performance Home and select Common, there's no way to control those part level assignments. So we're going to need to assign the common knobs to control the part level knobs. We already know that assign knob 1 is controlling part 1's first assignable knob, which in turn controls the filter cutoff, because we got that set up when we made our very first assignment to the super knob. The only common knob that actually does anything right now is knob 1. So let's turn off super knob link for all the other knobs, so that when we move the super knob, we only see it moving in the knob that we've actually programmed. Next, we can inspect that knob and give it a meaningful name if we hadn't already done so. There are 7 assignable knobs remaining without assigned destinations, so let's assign both the FM level and sync pitch for part 1 to the 8th assignable knob at the common level. I'll move that knob to switch the display to show its assignments, and now I can make the assignments with the big plus gadget. First, I want the knob to control part 1, assign 2, which is the FM level. I then also want it to control part 1, assign 3, which is the sync pitch. FM level makes fairly extreme changes to the sound, so I'm going to change the ratio for that destination so that when the knob is turned to its maximum, it never actually reaches the maximum FM level. Let's go to maybe about plus 15 and see how that goes. Now I'll give that knob a useful name. And the assignment's done. Perhaps I want the super knob to control this assignment, so let's turn the super knob link back on for knob 8 so that when I use the super knob to raise the cutoff, I also increase the FM level and sync pitch. However, the effect is too extreme, so I'm going to move the super knob to its maximum position, then dial back the level of knob 8. Then I'll press Shift and right above the super knob so that it remembers the values I dialed in when the super knob is in the full right position. Up to now, we've been working with performances that have just one part, so we haven't really had to think about how assignments work with multiple parts in play. But I want to show you more clearly the distinction between part level and common level assignments, so let's add another part to this performance. Let's bring in the CFX2 Dark performance we previously inspected into part 2, because we'll be able to hear it clearly against our pad. If we look at the sub-display to see how the assignable knobs are set up for part 2, we see the same thing as we did when we inspected the part level assignments for CFX2 Dark earlier. And in fact, if we use the page jump to bring up the controller sign overview and then change the display filter to all, we can see that all of the part level assignments have been imported. But if I switch to the common level assignments, then we only see the assignments we made to control part 1, and the common level assignments for CFX2 Dark are nowhere to be seen. This is an important lesson to learn about how Montage, MODX and Montage M work. When you use performance merge as we just did to bring in another performance into the current performance, while all the part level assignments are maintained, the common level assignments are not, for fairly obvious reasons, as we wouldn't want any common assignments controlling the parts already programmed to be overwritten. The absence of common level assignable knob destinations also means that the super knob won't operate in the same way as it did with the original CFX2 Dark performance. Therefore, if we want to be able to control the CFX2 Dark part level assignment while we have the whole performance selected, we're going to need to rebuild those common level assignments. Before Montage M, this would have seen me grabbing a pen and paper to make notes of how those common assignments are set up, so I could reproduce them in this performance, but now there's a better way. Because Montage M comes with the E.S.P plugin, I effectively have unlimited Montage M's at my disposal. So I can just load up an instance of E.S.P with the CFX2 Dark performance and copy the settings for the common assignments from there without having to resort to writing them down or doing a lot of back and forth between the performances on the Montage M itself. Using E.S.P with CFX2 Dark loaded, I'll select Common and change the menu that controls the lower panel to Common, Control, Control Assign. I'll switch the display filter to All, and there are all the assignments I need to copy. In CFX2 Dark, the common assignments are made to knobs 1 and 2, but I'm already using knob 1 to control the filter cutoff for part 1. So I'm going to need to make those assignments to knobs 2 and 3 instead. Let's go to the control assign interface for knob 2 and replicate the assignment, but instead of pointing to part 1 assign 1, we'll direct it to part 2 assign 1 and give the knob a useful name, which is part 2 rev send. Next, I'll activate knob 3 and copy the settings that CFX2 Dark has for its own knob 2. So this time the destination is part 2 assign 2. This time it's bipolar again and the ratio is -10, so it will actually reduce the cutoff as the knob value increases. I'll finish off by giving this knob a decent label. And we're almost done. The first of those assignments was for reverb send, and if we look back in E.S.P at the common effects section, we can see that CFX2 Dark is going to be sending its output to shimmer reverb with the mod reverb preset. So let's go and quickly copy the settings from E.S.P so that CFX2 Dark gets the correct effects applied. With common selected, we'll change the sub-display to quick edit, jump to the var rev section and plug in those settings from E.S.P. So the variation effect is going to be delay LCR, with the bright preset, and the reverb effect is going to be shimmer reverb with the mod reverb preset. And now we can head back to Performance Home and play with assignable knobs 2 and 3 to control the sound of CFX2 Dark in part 2. Let's keep building our multi-part performance and merge in FM lately bass. don't want the bass part to play across the whole keyboard, so let's go to split, set the bass to zone A and set the split point to A#0. So the bass will play up to A0. I'll also quickly edit the note shift for lately in general, pitch, and note shift, and raise it by an octave. Now we need to set up the common assignment knob destinations for this part. Back in E.S.P with FM lately bass loaded, we can see the common assignments. They're fairly simple again: knob 1 to part 1 assign 1, knob 2 to part 1 assign 2. But of course, we've now used the first 3 knobs of the common level in our performance. So we're going to need to program these to use knobs 4 and 5 instead. In the editing interface for knob 4, we'll point it at part 3 and assign 1, which is where lately is sitting. It's unipolar with a ratio of -24, and that's been brought in from the part level settings. We've also changed the parameter so that we get a slight curve here instead of a strictly linear response. We'll give it a label, which is going to be part 3 decay, and move on to knob 5. This time we want part 3 assign 2, being the second part level assignable knob, and set that with a ratio of +16 and parameter 1 set to 8 for a sort of ease in response. Label it up and we are done. With all the parts now responding to assignable knobs at the common level, we can think about restoring the super knob behavior for each of the parts. If we turn on super knob link for knobs 2, 3, 4 and 5, then when we move the super knob, you'll see that nothing actually happens because we pre-programmed the upper limit of these knobs when we set the right position. So let's turn all of those right up and reset the right setting for the super knob. So now if I turn the super knob, we'll see that all of those parts raise in sympathy, apart from knob 8, which we already programmed to only go part way. But we can do better than that. I want the super knob to make the sound more exciting as its value gets higher, but the way the first knob assignment is set up for FM lately bass works in the opposite way. Of course, that's not a problem, because we can tell the super knob to move knob 4 down as the super knob goes up. I'll start with the super knob at its minimum and then move knob 4 to its maximum and store that to the super knob by pressing Shift left. Next, I'll move the super knob to its maximum, but dial down knob 4 to its minimum and store that with Shift right. So now, while most of the knobs move upwards sympathetically with the super knob, apart from knob 8, which only goes part way, knob 4 moves in the opposite direction. Let's have a listen to that. Let's add some more control to our performances by using scenes to control super knob link. Let's open the scene menu and tell scenes 1, 2, 3 and 4 to just control super knob link. I'm going to store the current settings to scene 4 with Shift 4. And now I'll switch to scene 1 and turn off super knob link for all of the assignable knobs that don't control part 1 and store that to scene 1. Now I'll move over to scene 2 and turn off everything except the assignable knobs for part 2 and store that. And then on scene 3, we'll turn off everything except the FM lately bass assignable knobs, which are knobs 4 and 5, and store that to scene 3. So now I have a scene where the super knob controls just the knobs that point to part 1, and a scene where the super knob controls just the piano, a scene where the super knob controls only the bass, and a final scene where all parts are controlled. Up to this point, we've used the common assignable knobs to control the assignable knobs for the individual parts. But as I mentioned earlier, the common knobs can target destinations that exist at the performance level, like the settings for the global reverb and variation effects, or the overall performance volume. We've got a couple of spare knobs here, so let's make some assignments. I'll switch over to Quick Edit and select the var rev section and make sure we're looking at the reverb tab. The parameter I want to control isn't shown on the Quick Edit screen, but if I click Page Jump, then the full editor for the common reverb shows up in the main display. I want to control the reverb time, so I'm going to select that and turn it all the way down. Then I'll press Control Assign and assign it directly to my first unused common knob, which is knob 6. I'll give that a quick label, and now I have instant access to the reverb time attached to the shimmer reverb. Let's turn up the effects for the piano and play the piano on its own so that we can hear the effects. Let's do one more of those so I have a full complement of 8 assigned knobs at the common level. This time I'll press the tempo button and then select the tempo itself and control assign that to knob 7. I'll quickly add a rhythm part to my performance and off we go. Well, that was a fairly intense video, wasn't it? I hope you weren't too befuddled with all that talk of common assigned knob 5 controlling part 3 assigned 2 with a destination of oscillator 6. Hopefully, if you follow along with your own Montage M, it will all come together in your mind. If so, you should now know how to make control assignments to the various hardware controllers on the Montage M, including the super knob, the ribbon, the mod wheel, channel and polyphonic aftertouch, and the assignable knobs at both common and part level, and you'll have a decent head start in allowing those assignable knobs to be controlled by the super knob. As always, if you have any questions, please do ask in the comments. If you found this video useful, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.